Man, those are bright lights. I have not been on this stage in a long time, so it's so fun to be here. If I've never met you, my name's Jason. I'm the Next Gen Director here, and gosh, it's just really fun to see what the Lord's doing with you all. I could go on for 20 minutes, but I won't. I'm going to actually jump straight in because I want to just I'm a talker, so I want to just catch up with you all in individual conversations, but we'll do that later. And so I want to jump right in because tonight's text, y'all been going through the book of 1 Peter, right? Am I at the right service? No. Somebody's a jerk. You're fired. This text in 1 Peter tonight, I kind of texted Jake back and forth wrestling with what portion to walk through tonight because there's a lot in here, and then directly following this text is what we call a splinter text, meaning you rub your finger across and ouch, there's a splinter. It doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. You got to pull it. And then right before it, where we're in now, is a well-known text. It's a simple text in a sense, unless you go deeper into it, which we will for a minute. If I have time, and that's why I'm going to try and jump into it. I have 45 minutes, carry the one. Just somebody yell at me when I'm done, okay? So I'm going to try and go deeper into it at a certain point that you've probably heard. And then we'll come up for air again at the very end. And I want to tell you one of my favorite stories I've ever experienced regarding what we're talking about tonight. So in the book of 1 Peter, when you get into the book, there are two thematic lanes that go through the book of 1 Peter. One is the idea of harmony. You've pretty much just finished the sections of harmony. There's harmony with the government, there's harmony with employers, there's harmony within the home. So there's this idea of harmony. The other thing, and maybe the most major theme that goes through the book, is the idea of suffering. The word suffering or variation of that word appears 17 times in the book of 1 Peter. I remember when I was a youth pastor, we preached this. There was a different guy here. I made him look like a fool because I didn't know if his name was Chris. I didn't know if it would be cool or not. And so I was like, hey, you should walk out to because he's in chains. You should walk out in chains and preach the whole message chained up. And he did it. And so we all laughed at him. He was a huge dork. But there's this idea of suffering in this whole book. And so tonight, there is this idea of how to suffer and why to suffer that he embarks on, and he kind of dives into suffering for righteousness' sake. What is suffering and how does that go? And so, it's inevitable that all of us will have and have again and do now and all the time. You're going to suffer at some level. Your suffering may be a 10 out of 10. It may be a 1 out of 10. But there is suffering going to happen in your life if it hasn't already. And I'll make a promise to you. A lot of your 18 to 20 somethings in the room. I'm just going to promise you that the majority of you in the room, not everyone, this is not true of everyone, the majority of you in the room, you have not suffered the 10 out of 10 yet. I didn't suffer the 10 out of 10 until I was 37 years old. So you won't, and I thought I had suffered the 10 out of 10 prior to that, and I thought I have now, but maybe I haven't. I don't know, but it's inevitable that it's coming. And I was reminded of this over spring break. I went to visit some friends of mine that, they just had a baby, and he went through the Chick-fil-A program. You know what that is? I know you do. And so they do this thing. They go all over the world, and I don't know, they sacrifice goats and stuff, and they finally become a Chick-fil-A operator. I think that's how you get there. So I don't know. And so he had one just outside of Sacramento, and we wanted to go. They become some of our best friends, and the husband and the wife, and they just had a baby. And so we went to visit them, my wife and I. Her name is Sarah, and I didn't get her permission to tell this story, but we're that close, okay? And so I'm reminded of suffering because they just had this little baby. He's 6 months old now. So of course, I don't know, ladies, y'all weird when y'all get together like this. Let me explain. Dudes, if you're married in a room and you've had, your wife has had a baby, every time a woman, I don't get it, a woman has a baby, it's cool though, because you experience this. I'm not saying I know. I'm just saying, they're angry. If they have a baby, the wife, because you see the woman has a baby. We know that, right? Yep. We on the same page? Okay, good. And then the other woman comes who's had a baby, and they get together and they go, oh, tell me the birth story. Dudes, I'm just telling you it's coming. And you're like, I gotta go, I'll see you later. Have fun telling the birth story. And it's 2 hours of birth story. I don't know, I've never stayed for it, but tell me the birth story. And so Sarah's telling Brittany the birth story. And I did stay for this part because it was pre-birth, okay? And she said, I was really, really sick with this second child. And she said, I was so sick, I threw up all the time. And she said, matter of fact, right before a couple weeks before I gave birth, she said, it was the worst experience I've ever had in pregnancy. She said, I was throwing up all the time, and I was driving, and I was feeling a little queasy. And she said, man, I'd really like to go through a car wash, like an automatic car wash, vacuum my car, get my car cleaned. And, it's a couple weeks till we go to the birth's going to happen, and got your bag packed. And so she has a subscription to one of the automatic, 5-minute car washes, you know what I'm saying, that's like on every street corner. Now, how does they do? I don't know how they do that. And so she said, she pulls in, and she's by herself, and they don't have a dog, but for some reason she had a dog bowl in the car. It's significant to the story. So she gets in the line of the car, and she said right when she gets in, and right when the little attendant's saying this way, scoot that way, you put your tire there, she goes in, and the things are going, and she goes, I just started feeling it. She said, it was just coming up. You know how when you vomit, any of y'all scared of vomit? You know when you vomit? It's coming up here, and you're like, oh God, it's coming. And when it gets like right here, there's no stopping it. You know what I'm saying? Anybody? Oh man, and it's coming up, and she said, I was just going to vomit. And she said, I looked around, and I was going to open the door, and I can't open the door because I'm inside the car wash. And I can't open my door in the car wash. And she said she's holding it, and then she didn't know what to do, and she panicked, and she reaches for the dog bowl, and right in the middle of her car, and she just pukes everywhere. And she said, I was just miserable, and it's just as everybody, it's inevitable that they're suffering all the time. And I wanted to read you a claim because it's inevitable that you suffer all the time. And this is supposedly a true claim of an insurance claim, one of the greatest of all time. This is proof that everybody suffers inevitably all the time. The question is, how and why do you deal with it? The question is, what do I do? How do I and why do I suffer? I got to know that. And he says this is called the bricklayer's insurance claim. This is one of my favorites. He said, to whom it may concern, writing to his insurance company, I'm writing in response to your request for additional information for my insurance claim. In block number 3 of the accident claim form, I wrote, trying to do the job alone as the cause of my accident. You said in your letter that I should explain that statement more fully. I trust the following details will be sufficient. I'm a bricklayer by trade. On the date of the accident, I was working alone on the roof of a new 6-story building. When I had completed my work, I discovered that I had about 500 pounds of bricks left over. Rather than carrying the bricks down by hand, I decided to lower them down in a barrel by using a pulley which was attached to the side of the building at the 6th floor level. Securing the rope at ground level, I went up to the roof, swung the barrel out, and loaded the bricks into it. Then I went back down to the ground, untied the rope, holding it tightly to ensure a slow descent of the 500 pounds of bricks. You will note in block number 22 of the claim that my weight is 150 pounds. Due to my surprise of being jerked off the ground at a rapid pace, I lost presence of mind, and I forgot to let go of the rope. Needless to say, I proceeded up the side of the building at a very rapid rate of speed. In the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming down. This explains my fractured skull and collarbone you referenced and needed information about. Slowed only slightly, I continued my rapid ascent, not stopping until the fingers of my right hand were 2 knuckles deep into the pulley. By this time, I had regained my presence of mind and was able to hold tightly to the rope in spite of my pain. At approximately the same time, however, the barrel of bricks hit the ground and the bottom fell out of the barrel. Devoid of the weight of bricks, the barrel then weighed approximately 50 pounds. I refer you again to the information in block number 22 regarding my weight. As you might imagine, I began a rapid descent down the side of the building. In the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming up this time. This accounts for the 2 fractured ankles and the lacerations of my legs that you will not cover and you would like to know more about. The second encounter with the barrel slowed me enough to lessen my injuries when I fell into the pile of bricks, and fortunately, only 3 vertebrae were cracked when I fell into those. I am sorry to report, however, as I lay on the bricks in pain, unable to stand, and watching the empty barrel 6 stories above me, I again lost my presence of mind and let go of the rope. The empty barrel weighed more than the rope, so it proceeded at a rapid descent down the side of the building, landing on and breaking both of my legs. I hope that I have furnished enough information for you to cover my injuries, trying to explain a job done alone as the accident. Suffering is inevitable. Suffering is inevitable. The question is, how will you suffer and why will you suffer? So, suffering can be laughed at, or suffering can be full of tears. You have a suffering story too. It may not be like the bricklayer. It may not be like my friend Sarah, but it may be something that you can't laugh at. One of the greatest sufferings of my life is that when a doctor told me my little girl wouldn't live very long when she was born and there was nothing we could do. And I remember fervently praying, God, do something miraculously. What do I do? And we had weeks to know. And we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And inside Mama's tummy, she was just fine. But then there's a category of suffering you don't have when you don't have it. You know what I mean? I didn't know what it was like to hold a little girl and watch her die. But now I do. It's not one I can really laugh at. You see, when my little girl was born and I knew she would no longer be with us, I have comfort and I know how to suffer. I know biblically. But until you get to that point, man, there's a category you don't have yet. But the point is, and the fact is, suffering is inevitable. And it's coming for you. And it's coming for you at a rate and a pace and a gravity that you have not experienced yet, most likely. That might not be true for everyone in the room. I didn't know in a million years that I would have a category like that. And some of you have a category that's very similar. And I want to speak to you tonight simply on this idea that if you can follow this text, you will know how and why suffering is for you. Suffering is in your life. You will know how to suffer, and you will know why you suffer. Now, I'm not saying I will answer. I don't know why the Lord took my daughter. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm going to answer every question you have about each individual suffering, but I'm going to tell you generally what this text has to tell us about knowing why and knowing how. Because James speaks of it, doesn't he? We know this text, consider it all joy, my brothers, brothers and sisters, brethren, when you face trials of various kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and you go, great, that sounds great, but it's still hard. But there's a passage in there, or at the bottom of that passage, verse 16, I think, that we often forget. It's the end of the story. It's the bookend. The first is consider it all joy when you face trials of many kinds. And the bottom of it says, because every good gift, including suffering or trials, is from God, who's the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation and no shifting of shadow. So how can a trial or suffering be such a gift to me? Well, I've got to know how to suffer, and I've got to know why to suffer. And here's kind of the thing that you could grasp this entire idea. You see, when my wife and I were suffering in this and going through this trial that we had no category for, I don't know where it came or how we were reading it, but we were reading in the book of Jude. And there's this part of Jude that I guarantee to you it doesn't mean to you what it means to me. At the very end of Jude, he simply says this in his ending the book. He says, now to him, God, who is able to keep you. That's all he says. And when I read that, there was this moment of like, he's able to keep me. To him who is able to keep you. That in your trial, there is one who is able to keep you. And in your suffering, there is one who is able to keep you. And I was okay knowing that there was one who was able to keep me. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 through 18 is where we'll be tonight. Open, if you have your Bibles, open there. If not, you can, cheat off your neighbor. But there's this idea of suffering that he's going to unpack. And he's going to say, here's how to suffer, and here's why we suffer, Christians. And he's going to go in. And by the way, if you're not a Christian in the room, there's going to be a point in this. In verse 15, it's the depth of it that applies to you in the total mirrored representation that applies to us. And if you're not a Christian in the room, that's totally fine. We were all there too, and suffering was on the other side of the mirror for us too. And I'll get there, but I just want you to know that it's for you as well. And you got to know verses 10 through 12 to know the rest of this text. In verses 10 through 12, he's going to be quoting or really applying Psalm 34. And he's going to say this, and as he does this, he goes, whoever desires to love life and to see good days, like if you want to love your life and you want to have the best shot at a great life and loving your life, he goes, let's just start here. Keep your tongue from evil. In other words, don't be a moron. And your lips from speaking lies and deceit. Don't be an idiot, man. I mean, I was with this guy the other day, and this was a while ago. You don't know him, I promise, and I promise you don't know him. I'm not yet, whatever. And he was with me, and he was like, man, I hate my life. My wife, I'm going to leave her. I'm going to move to this other state, and I'm going to do this, and my job's. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I just want to, like, curl up and die right now with this dude. And I was like, well, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I don't know. I think I'm having an affair with this girl I met, this waitress. I go there all the time. I'm like, dude, whoa. I'm like, bro, you're not even giving yourself a chance. Like, dude, you think this is going to be a good idea? I'm going to go do. I mean, I was like, bro, come on. Like, I want to say, hey, if you desire to love your life, can you just start by shutting your mouth and just think about what you're doing? So he says, man, if you want to love life, let's just start here. Turn away from evil and do good. Just make an effort going towards the righteousness of God. Just make a little bit of effort. And he said, in the next part of 11, why don't you seek peace and pursue it? Don't just, here's the thing, what do they say? What you choose to do in the hours of your day make up the entirety of your life. So he says that in these moments, choose to seek peace. Quit making the decisions you're making, because sometimes suffering is self-brought and taught. In other words, sometimes the suffering we suffer is because you made a really stupid decision. I've made a really stupid decision. Sometimes it's out of your control. Sometimes it's not. He says this in 12, but remember the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. So if you're pursuing these things and you're pursuing God, the eyes of God, he knows right where you are, even if it's in the middle of a trial and suffering. When the disciples are in a boat and they're sinking and Jesus walks on water, have you ever thought how he knew where they were? Like, was he walking around looking and calling for them? No, he walked straight to them. Because even in the moment of their greatest trial, Jesus knows right where they are. And so and his ears are open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. To this guy, I want to say, dude, you think the Lord's going to let you be happy? So I ask that to me a lot. A lot of times I ask my wife, man, life sometimes isn't happy when I'm just doing things, not like totally sinful sometimes. Sometimes it is, but doing things that it's not who the Lord made me to be. I'm this guy, but I'm trying to be this guy. And so sometimes he just doesn't let me succeed, or he doesn't let me find peace. And so he says, would you just for a minute, just make an effort. And so knowing verses 10 through 12, I'll show you what he says about suffering. He says, if you want to know how to suffer and you want to know why we suffer, verse 13, you've got to suffer righteously. Verse 13, you've got to suffer righteously. Now, so when you see now, it's because you know 10 through 12. He goes, now, since I've reminded you the Psalm 34, now I can speak to you. Who is there to harm you if you're zealous for what's good? So he says, who's going to mess with you? Who's going to cause such suffering to you if you're zealous for doing good? It's kind of a double meaning in what he's saying. He's saying, don't you have a better chance at living a great life without that much suffering if you're trying to do the right thing and the good thing and not being a moron? Do you think marriage will be better if you start to have an affair? No, you idiot, right? So if you want to take notes, don't be an idiot, right? And he says, this is what we do. We suffer righteously. Who's going to harm you if you're zealous for doing good? He's referring to verse 12. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. But he's going to say in a minute, even if you do, so hang on. But he says, this is what it is. Do what's righteous, and it might be less likely that people mistreat you. If you work or you go to school or whatever you do, if you're a complete jerk to people at school and work, then expect them to be treating you poorly. If you are kind and loving and patient and seeking righteousness even for them, I bet you there's a large chance that they'll treat you better. So he says, real common sense. Let's just start here. Just try and do good. suffer righteously. But in verse 14, even if you should suffer, so now he's going to go, okay, let's say now you've 10 through 12 and verse 13, you're trying, you're making the effort, you're moving in that direction. You're not Eeyore, you're Winnie the Pooh. Anybody? No, okay, great. Yeah, okay. Some of y'all are born in 2005. I graduated college. Well, college took me a few years because it's so boring. Why did I want to go? Anyway, if you're in college, you should go. It's fun. Yeah, it's real fun. I went to UNT. Yeah, I think I went there a couple times. Anyway, but even if you should suffer, so even if you're trying your best and you suffer a little bit, let me tell you, he says, here's what I want you to know. So first one, suffer righteously. And the next one, and I love this one, suffer recklessly. I'll show you what I mean. Suffer recklessly. Even if you should suffer, do it for righteous. If you're pursuing righteousness for righteousness' sake, even if you are, he goes, let me tell you something. You'll be blessed. Verse 10, he's referring back to verse 10. Whoever desires love, life, and see good days, you want to try it? You'll be blessed. He will bless you. Now, will the blessings come? Now, I'm not saying you get a Corvette and money and all this stuff. The blessing might not come in the way you choose. The blessing might come a completely different way, but in verse 14, he's going to say, you will be blessed. James says, consider it all joy, brothers, when you face trials of various kinds, knowing the test you face produces endurance, have a perfect work, so you have be lacking nothing. And then he says, because every gift comes from God. Have you forgotten that? Can you imagine that the greatest suffering of your life is a gift from God? When the Lord took my daughter home, it was the greatest gift he could give me. Sorry, sometimes it sneaks up on me. You see, it's real pain for me. I'm not putting a show on. That really snuck up on me. I never cry, ever. That's a joke. You see, when I get embarrassed, that's a joke. You see, what on earth is the Lord going to do, and how can I call it a gift? One guy told me that he said, isn't it great that immediately, or with the same day, my daughter died the same day, she went into the most loving arms of the most loving daddy she could ever meet and imagine. And I went, oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. Because I'm an idiot, see, and I'm a terrible dad. I was like, yeah, I would have been like, hey, I don't know. It is so good. Now, what are all the gifts the Lord's going to using to give me? I don't know. Is he able to keep me? Yes. You see, that's for you. It's the same for me. It's every perfect gift, but I don't know what they are. So my 10-year-old he plays baseball right now, and I'm the assistant coach, and I hate baseball, okay? And so it's really fun. So I'm a golfer, and so I'm like, why didn't the ball stay stationary on the ground? I don't understand the hitting the ball thing. And here's the worst part. Have you ever been to they're 10 and under. You ever been to a 10U baseball? Any of you baseball people? So I love baseball. It's my favorite sport. It's my favorite. I love it. It's so fun. And I love school. So here's a problem with 10U baseball. These kids, they're throwing that ball as fast as they can, whoop, but they don't have a clue where it's going. So the problem is it's just walk, score, walk, beamed, beamed. Kids are crying on the ground. I mean, it's like, this is so bad. So my kid, he's not very good. He's the worst one on the team. Don't tell him I said that, okay? Is this no, I don't think my son doesn't do it. He doesn't even know if he's right-handed or left-handed. All right, it's fine. It's cool. It's cool. It's fine. I'm not that dad. That's cool. But when I pray for him, I was like, son, what do you think about when he's left-handed, when you bat? I said, what do you think about? He's like, how quick I can strike out so I can go back to the dugout. Great. Okay, that's a start. Okay. And he goes, Dad, I'm just so scared to get hit by the ball. I'm like, bro, I hear you, dude. It's going to hurt so bad. You're going to be crying. And I'm like, shh. Like, that's not helping. And so when he walks up, a lot of times I'm praying, and my son is not very good, and that's okay. I really don't care. I love it, actually. And I'm praying, like sometimes when he goes up to bat, because I'm the third base coach. Go, steal, that's what I do. And so I'm like, Lord, here's what I want to pray. Here's what I want to pray. Don't let him get hit by that ball. He's so scared of that ball. I'm scared of the ball. Don't let him get hit by the ball. That's what I want to pray. Followed by, Lord, just let him get a hit. Just one hit, man. Just one hit. He hasn't got on base in like a year and a half. One hit. Like, that's what I want to pray. And maybe I did pray that for a few games. I'm like, okay, Lord, this isn't working. Like, what's going on? And so just no reason, I started to pray a different prayer, and I pray it for each kid that goes up now. And I said, Lord, would you make whatever needs to happen at that plate right now for that kid to be more like Christ? Would you make that happen? If he needs to strike out, if he needs to get hit by a pitch, if he needs to get a home run, like that doesn't happen. If he needs to whatever, would you just make that happen? And would you give us as coaches the wisdom to get them through it? Now I don't know why the head coach and I, we're both believers, and I just pray that differently for my kid. And it's a perspective that's different because if my kid gets hit, it's going to be suffering, right? But there's a gift in that somewhere. Like he might quit baseball and we never have to play again. No, I'm kidding. But there's a gift in that somewhere. There's a growing moment in there somewhere, right? And so it's kind of like the same as praying, because nobody wants to suffer. You don't want to get hit by a pitch. You don't want the bad stuff to happen. So the prayer we often say is, Lord, take this pain away from me, right? Maybe our prayers need to change. Maybe it's the how and the why of suffering that we don't quite see. And honestly, we need to repent of. Repentance doesn't mean go the other way, even though we've heard that's the result. Yes, it means change the way you think about that and result in light of who God is. So in light of who God is, repenting of pulling suffering away and going, God, I know you're someone who knows where I am. Your eyes are always on me. But the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. And I'm pursuing good. Lord, I don't know why this trial and pain is here, but I trust you, and would you teach me what you need to teach me quickly and efficiently, and would you let me be honoring to you as I go through this? So maybe it's a shifting of that, right? Because we suffer recklessly. Even if you should suffer, you will be blessed. So that's what my point is this. You will be blessed. How? By getting hit by a pitch and never playing baseball again? Maybe. By getting hit by a pitch and going, that wasn't so bad. I don't know. He's 10. I don't know what the Lord's going to teach him. Have you ever looked back on your life and gone, man, this event that was so hard when she dumped me, and I was I learned this new phrase this week. Drip. You heard this? Drip, man. Anyway, I got into it with this waiter. There's a waiter at a restaurant, and he told me about it, and I didn't know him. I was like, dripping. I was like, I'm drip. Am I drip? I was like, we're dripping. You dripping? And it was great. My wife was so red and embarrassed. What's my point? I don't know. It was going to be good. It was something about dripping. What'd you say? Oh, yeah. So thank you, girl drama. So you get dumped by the girl, and you be dripping? Oh. He's like, and you drip on God? You drip on me? No? That's what they taught me anyway. Sorry. I strike that from the recording. Dripping. Okay, let me try it again. Can't wait to tell my wife I said that from stage. She's going to hate me. But you get dumped by the girl. It was the worst thing in life, right? You get dumped by the dude, whatever. And aren't those things like the life-changing moments that you look back on and go, wow, the Lord taught me so much? Yeah, they are. Because there's a gift in there somewhere. Because you've got to suffer recklessly. Because here's why you suffer recklessly. Because you have no fear of them, nor be troubled. He says it in the last part of the verse. You don't have fear of the people that are persecuting you. If it's humans that are persecuting you, you have no fear of them. Troubled. You're not troubled by the outcome. Matter of fact, you're not troubled. In the Greek, it's a weird translation. I won't go too deep, but it goes, you're not troubled by the things they're troubled by. So just remember, verse 10 through 12, be at peace. Seek peace. Don't be troubled. Don't worry about them, because you can suffer recklessly knowing that you're a child of God. He knows right where you are. That for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His eyes are on you. He knows where you are. He knows this is best for you and for his glory. Sometimes we don't think those things mesh. And he says we suffer recklessly also in that last part. When he says, don't be troubled, that you don't have to fear what they fear of the world. Meaning, it's kind of like the bully. Like the bully, he bullies you because he wants to belittle you, because he wants to be, he puts you down so he can raise him up, right? Were you ever told that? You don't have to fear what the bully fears, to be low or to be not loved or not liked. You don't fear that. We don't have that fear. See, you don't have the same fears. Don't worry about what they're doing. You're blessed. Don't fear people. Don't fear outcomes. A lot of times suffering comes from because if I hadn't, it's just regret, right? It's like anxiety and depression, which are real things. I'm not diminishing them at all. Anxiety is this fear of what could or what couldn't happen in the future. Depression usually is this depressed feeling about what did or didn't happen in the past. But you know what? We don't have to fear that because the outcome is the Lord's and he loves you. Man, he ain't going to give you a snake, right? He ain't going to give you a snake. He's your Father. Man, he loves you. So we can suffer recklessly, meaning we're confident about the outcome, knowing that it's for our good and his glory. In verse 15, we suffer readily. And this is the verse that I'll try to go a little deep into real fast as we go. What time did I start? I forget. We'll try to go a little deep into, because you've heard this one before if you're a church-going person. If you're not, you'll go deep with us right away. Suffer readily, but in your hearts, honor Christ as the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So give a defense for the gospel. Give a defense for the hope that is in you. This is if you're not a church-going person, this is the verse that's familiar to us. So if you've ever heard the word apologetics, you ever heard that word? It's if you were to take, let me see what the words are. If you were to take being prepared to make a defense, it's one word in the Greek. It's sorry, how do you say this? I got to look at my notes. Apologia. We get the word apologize, but we use it differently. And we get the word apologetics from this Greek word that summarizes to make a defense. So it's to make a defense for the gospel. So there's something in here, I don't usually do this, but I want to just take a second and do this. I want to rabbit trail, but down, deeper into this one little verse, because I think it will help us with how we live in suffering, and it will help us how we live in life. And if you're an unbeliever in the room, I want you to really listen here, okay? Verse 15, but in your hearts, honor Christ. You see, there's this motivation of if I'm to suffer well, and if that in my heart, my motivation is to honor Christ. To honor Christ. If you've ever heard me talk about dating, I say this is the motivation in every dating relationship, to honor Jesus in through what you do, and that's the lens by which you view your entire relationship. That your heart has to be motivated. So if you're in a dating relationship and you sat with me and said, hey, what are my physical boundaries? I would say, I don't care. And you'd say, you're blaspheming. You're blaspheming. And I would say, yeah, I don't care. I would ask you, I would rather say, well, what's your motivation for asking me? And you would say, what does that mean? I say, I don't know, you tell me. And we'd get in this funny little conversation. And then I would say, well, what's the goal of you dating? And you would go, to get married. And I would go, nah, wrong. And you would go, oh, my pastor my whole life has always told me that. I think it's in the Bible somewhere. And I'd go, wrong. And so now your goal of dating is way bigger than that. It's to honor Christ in and through what you do in that dating relationship, because isn't that all of life? Yes. And he says here that this is the goal in your suffering. In your hearts, honor Christ. So if that's my motivation, now back to my dating, if I'm honoring Jesus, will my physical boundaries conversation need to come up at some point? Sure. But now is it appropriate? It absolutely is. Why? Because my motivation is to honor Christ. Same thing here. If in my suffering or in my life, my goal is to honor Christ, I have a whiteboard back there, but I'm not going to bring it out because it'll take too much time. I would write the word example. That in where it says honor Christ, there is an example that I'm setting. It's in my actions. When suffering comes, do you go get lit? Do we still say lit for drunk? Okay. Do we still smoke weed? Don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Do you go get lit when you have suffering? Is that the action you take? Or is it different? What is it that motivates you to do that? Is it to honor Christ? Because here's the question. Because verse 15, the popular verse goes, be ready to give a defense. Question. Why are they going to ask you in the first place? Make sense? I mean, somebody's not going to go, hey, I saw that hard thing happen, and you went to the bar, and you got so drunk, dude, that was awesome. You passed out, and you were there for like 3 days. That was so cool. Hey, why do you love Jesus? Like, hey, what's different about you? No, that's not going to happen. But what if there's an example, right? There has to be, in order for somebody to ask you what's the hope that's in you, that's what the verse says, there's got to be an example by which it's not normal. And they go, what on earth do you have? When I got saved, I was 17. There was a guy and a girl. And I asked them, this is what my final question of my whole journey to salvation was, I want what you have. Can you tell me what it is? And they said, it's Jesus. I go, no, I don't want Jesus. I want all the fun stuff. You're joyful. You're this. I wanted what they said, well, what is it? It's Jesus. I said, no, I don't want Jesus. I want what you have. I was asking them, what's the hope in you? because you're different than me. And so there's example. And then if I had a whiteboard, I would make a circle and go down to the next thing, and it would say this, explanation. So now, so the first one was actions, an example. The second one is words. It's an explanation. Because my example causes someone to ask me, what's different about you? And then, in the verse, you honor the Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone ask for the reason for the hope. So they say, you're different what it is, and you're always ready to go. Now, here's what this isn't. If you've been a churchgoer, let me just release you of some burdens. You ain't got to know the Greek. You don't have to know. I don't even care if you know the Bible's in order. I don't care. Here's what you got to know. Christ died, Christ rose, and he did so to impute righteousness to you, to give you his righteousness. Because didn't Christ suffer righteously? And didn't he suffer recklessly? You see, you just got to know the right fist, hold on tight gospel truth. I don't care if you're pre, mid, post, trib, or meal. I mean, I care. And we can talk about that and have fun, but I don't care. That's not the defense. You go, oh, let me defend it. Let me defend why we're pre-mill. I don't care. Don't defend that. You don't have to do that. Matter of fact, he's going to speak to you in a minute. He's going to say this because there is an explanation. Here's the question. So if the first question you would ask to and I would write this if we were to go deep and we were in a Bible study and we were just face to face. The example is my actions. My question is this: how will you be asked about your hope if your example isn't fitting to the things of God? Number two is the explanation, your words. Can I explain what I believe about the gospel truths? Or am I like a demon in James 2, the demons believe and they shudder? Last E, I would say, is my expression. This is my tone. I loved Dr. Kreider. He was at Dallas Seminary. I loved his class because he loved to poke the bear. Jake, do you have Kreider? Do you ever have Kreider? I don't know if you're in here. He would poke the bear, and he would try to get these brilliant seminary students to argue with him, and I would just go, yes! Please argue with the professor for 20 years who's reading out of a Greek Bible, but he's transliterating into English. Please argue with him. And these arrogant, let me tell you what the thing, and he would just slay them. And I was like, yes, I just wanted to say to that guy, shut up. I wanted to say, your tone is so arrogant. I don't ever want to work with you. Here's a question I would ask. Do I express myself with gentleness, respect, and a good conscience? Because, he says this, verse 15, but if your hearts honor Christ, that's my example. The Lord is holy, always being prepared to make defense to anyone who asks for a reason. That's my explanation for the hope that is in me. Yet, do it with gentleness and respect. There's a tone in which you do it. Some of us, when we're suffering well and there's an explanation or there's an example we set, there's an explanation we give, we've got to do that in a lot different way. Not like, well, you're going to hell and I'm not, so I can suffer better. That's not it. That's not it. And if you do this, I would draw explanation or example to explanation to whatever I did for tone. I made an expression. Then I would circle all of that, and I would say it equals something bigger. It's actually what I wrote in my Bible. It equals verse 16. Having a good conscience. How am I going to have a good conscience through suffering? I'm going to set a good example, be ready for my explanation, and I'm going to make sure I express myself appropriately. Then I have a good conscience. And then I have this whole picture in my mind. If I had a whiteboard, and this was where I'd make a fool of myself, then I would draw a window. So I would draw those 3 E's, and they would be a big circle, and then I would say they equal verse 16, a good conscience. That's how it is in my mind. Then I would draw a window, and the window would be really clear, like a clear conscience, because there are 3 types of conscience. There's a good conscience, that's a clear one. So that's the window that's just very clean, and you can see clearly, and you can navigate life. Guess what? When you're in a trial or you're suffering, what do you need? Clear conscience, so you can navigate it clearly. Well, so that's one type of conscience. He says you got to have a good one. How am I going to have a good one? Following those 3 E's. But he says, but you also have this seared conscience. I'd fog in the window just a little bit. your conscience gets seared when you've remained in that hidden sin so long, it just becomes numb and calloused, you know what I mean? Or you've just been burned so many times in life, and you feel maybe by God you have, and maybe it's by somebody else, somebody you love, and there's this searing of your conscience, and then it gets a little dim, and then there's this defiled, I would, by the way, if you want to look into that, 1 Timothy 4:2, this seared, 1 Timothy 4:2, this seared conscience, and then Titus 1:15, in the defiled conscience, that it continues to go, and that window's black. You can't see through it. How are you going to navigate through trials of life, through suffering, if your conscience is not clear? Meaning, I am, verse 15, honoring Christ, ready to speak in gentleness and respect. Man, you can navigate any trial with those three things. With verse 15, a lot of people say, oh, it's the apologetic verse. It is. It's literally the word. But it's not so that you can win a debate, guys. So that you can navigate your suffering. Because verse 18 is where it draws to this conclusion. 17 and 18. Because 17, he says, for it's better to suffer for doing good, if this should be God's will, than for doing evil. So he said, if you're going to suffer, it's better for doing good than for doing evil. Because you're going to suffer because suffering's inevitable. Whether it's a bricklayer's claim or somebody puking in a car, suffering's inevitable. Whether it's death or whatever it is in your life, suffering's inevitable. It's better that you do it good. Because if you write in your Bible, I would circle better, and I would refer to 4 things up top. It's better because verse 14, you are blessed for doing good and suffering in good. Verse 14, you have no fear in your suffering because you know the outcome is for your good and his glory. And verse 16, that it results in your good conscience if you can follow those 3 parts he spells out in verse 15. And then the best part is when he says, verse 16, if you have a good conscience, when you're slandered, those who revile, who speak ill against your good behavior that Christ names, they are put to shame. You have no shame. There's no shame when you live life. Verse 15, when you live it that way, he says, when you have this good conscience, I skipped this last part, so let's go back. When you're slandered, those who speak ill of your good behavior in Christ, they will be put to shame. This is what Paul says in Romans 12 when he says, hey, if your enemy's hungry, give them something to eat. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink, because it's like heaping coals on their head. There's a way, as you, those who revile your good behavior, they're put to shame. Because he says up at top, it's actually a tie up to verse 9, where he says, when somebody does evil against you, don't return it with evil. Because you see, there's 3 types of that. He says returning something good for evil is satanic. Returning something good for good is just human. But returning something evil for good is divine. Because this is what Jesus does to you and me. Can you imagine the statement that Jesus returned something evil for good? Make no mistake, there's no good in us outside of Christ. And if there is no good, there is evil. It is light or it is dark. There are 2 kingdoms. It is one or the other. The kingdom of light is open to us by the person of Christ. Because it's better for doing good, if it should be God's will, than for doing evil. Because, verse 18, I don't know if I gave you my R words. Suffering reputably is verse 16 and 17. Verse 18, for Christ also suffered once for sins, that there was one death on one cross at one time that paid the sins for all of humanity's past, present, and future. That one sacrifice would be the final sacrifice for the perfect, unblemished Lamb of God. That there would be one man that would bring sin into the world through Adam, and there would be one man, the second Adam, Jesus, who would eradicate sin for all time. The righteousness is for the unrighteous, the good replaced the evil, that righteousness was imputed, given to us. It's not my righteousness that stands before God, it's Jesus' righteousness. That's why we can be seen as arrogant by others. They say, can you say you can stand before God? 100% yes, I can. Why, do you think you're that good? Oh, no, but I think he is, and he has given me all that righteousness. What'd you bring to the table? All my sin and my evil. He exchanged his good for your evil? Absolutely, he sure did. Once for sins, righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. That death was not the end, but death and then his resurrection, that he was made alive. For if there is no resurrection, there is no Christianity. If there is no resurrection, there is no Christ. If there is no resurrection, there is no salvation. Our faith hangs on the humiliation of its God, being the death and the resurrection of the Son. And if he's still dead, so are you and I. If he's still dead, there is no eternity with God. If he's still dead, there is no hope. Yet there is this verse of people asking, what is the hope in you? Because if you're the unbeliever I spoke of, isn't that the question you have? That's what I had. The question is either, why do you have all this hope? Or, I've tried the Jesus thing and I didn't get the hope. It didn't work for me. Right? There's this question of, I was doing the right things and then God had this happen, this suffering, this moment. Why did God do this if you've got all this hope and life's this good for you? Whoop-de-poop, I tried to do all that stuff too and it ended in terror for me, but why not for you? Or even worse, you were such a tool and I wasn't. But you gave your life to Jesus and you have all this hope and I don't. And I don't think he's even real anymore. Because if he is, he would save me from my suffering. Lord, don't let Cameron get hit by a pitch. I don't want my boy to suffer. Boy, I'm sure glad God didn't go, don't whip Jesus again. I don't want him to suffer. Don't put him on the cross. I don't want him to suffer. I don't want him to suffer. I'm sure glad God didn't pray that same hearted prayer that I pray when my son goes to bat for his son who went to die. You see, if you're that unbeliever in the room that man, you have that question. I want that hope. You had the question I did to that guy and the girl. I want you have. What is it, Jesus? No, I tried that. Man, can I just tell you, it's the how and the why we suffered that you're missing. The how we suffer is we suffer knowing his eyes are on you. He knows right where you are. That doesn't mean he takes away the pain. Here's something that's even bigger than that to think about. The hope that he speaks of, it's Christ now, but it's heaven later. You're not promised this world. We're not prince and princesses of this world. This isn't for us. It will be made new. Our hope is Jesus and eternity. Our hope isn't a solar eclipse. It was really cool. But that's not our hope. Man. Because here's something to think about. Jesus suffered more in 3 hours than you'll suffer in your entire life. And it wasn't because he died or there was a spear or cat of nine tails. You know why it was? Because in the garden when he says, take this cup from me, Lord, I don't want it. He's saying the wrath of God is about to be poured out on me, Jesus, the perfect lamb, and I don't deserve it and I don't know what this like. Well, is there any other way? Jesus suffered the full wrath of God so that you didn't have to in 3 hours on a cross. There's no suffering that comes at a higher cost. That's a 10. He suffered because he was standing for righteousness by becoming righteousness. We suffer righteously in verse 13. He suffered righteously because he's the perfect, spotless Lamb of God. He had to be perfect to Jewish law, and he was. Down to him. Why do you think Jesus had to be baptized by John? It wasn't because of anything other than he had to be perfect at every point of the law, even in baptism, though he didn't need it to show a change in anything. He suffered recklessly because he knew he would be raised. He did not fear death when he says, take the cup. He fears the wrath of God because he doesn't deserve it. So he suffers recklessly, knowing the end, the outcome of the event. He has that advantage because he's God. You and I don't. He was ready because he knew. He suffered readily because he knew he was the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one came to the Father except through him. And he was ready to give a defense to anyone who would ask that there was one way to God. Is there one way to God? Yes. Am I a jerk for saying that? No, maybe, but I don't mean to be. I'm just telling you what he said. And he suffered readily to tell people. He says to the woman at the well, she says, when the Messiah comes, I'll know he's here. And he said, woman, I am who speak. Whoa! Like he knows. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And he was reputable. He suffered reputably. There was a reputable suffering to him, verse 16 through 17, because he was perfect in all the law. And he was perfect in all he did. And he shows us the how and the why that we suffer. And I'll leave you with this. There's this story, and it's true. And it's a guy, his name was Alex. That was his real name. He's still alive. He's just older now. And he went to the same high school he went to a different high school that I did, but he grew up in the same city. He was a little younger than me. And he went to a large school. It was a public school that was in the town. And I think it was prom. I'm not sure which dance it was. But Alex went to this dance, and Alex was a believer. Alex was a believer that was made fun of for his faith. He wasn't the coolest kid in school. He wasn't a star athlete. He wasn't that well known, but he was known for his Christianity. He was known for his faith in Jesus, I should say. And he was ridiculed. He suffered for it. And and I'm going to be a little more graphic with you because you're not kids. He went to a dance, and at the dance there was this line of guys. And the line of guys were lined up to a circle of guys. And inside the circle, there was dancing going on. And the circle existed so that the chaperones couldn't see inside the circle. And inside the circle, there was one girl, and she was laying down on the ground. She was clothed, but as they would dance, every dance simulated some form of sexual activity with this girl on the floor. And there was a line of guys to participate in this. The girl was willingly doing it. At least on the surface. And so Alex got in line because Alex had already suffered righteously. Alex had already pursued righteousness in his life, and everybody knew it, and they ridiculed him for it. He'd already done that part. And so now Alex is about to suffer recklessly. He gets in line. True story. And he waits in line, and one guy after the next guy goes in there and does some pretty grotesque dancing with this young girl. It's a high school girl on the floor. Sometimes she's not on the floor. Sometimes she is. Super sad scene. And he gets in line, and he comes to the front of the line, and it's his turn next. And he suffers righteously by getting in line. He suffers recklessly by going over to the young lady. And she's on the floor, and she's kind of half smiling. Her hair's messed up. All these guys have, it's not, they haven't like raped her or anything like that, but it's really gross. And Alex looked down at her, and he reaches down, and he puts his hand out just like this. And so not really knowing what to do, she grabs his hand, and he picks her up, and he stands her up. And he said to her, would you like to dance? And she didn't know what to do, and there was a song on. He just started slow dancing with her, right in the center of all these guys at the line. And he just danced with her. Just normal, slow dance with this girl. And this girl starts weeping in his arms as he's dancing with her. And all these dudes are making fun of him and surrounding him and calling him all these names. And she says, why are you doing this? And you see, he was suffering readily. He said, well, I saw this going on and I couldn't stand for it anymore because, you see, I love the person of Jesus. And he tells her, he says, and he loves you too. And you don't need to do this to be impressive to all these guys. And he shares the gospel with her while he's slow dancing with her, while all these men, these idiot boys, had just done stupid stuff. And he was ready to tell her all about the gospel and all about those things. And he says, are you ready to leave? She said, yes, please. And he takes her by the hand and he says, excuse me. And they're ridiculing him and kind of pushing him. And he walks through the guys. And he takes her out, and he takes her to his car, and he takes her home. And he drops her off, and he says, remember, Jesus loves you right where you are, no matter what you've done or haven't done. And he leaves. And you see, there was a suffering reputably that Alex had to do this. And he was ridiculed for it. But guess what? When he got back to school, nobody made fun of him anymore for being a Jesus follower. And that young girl, for the rest of our high school at least, didn't do what she used to do because of one guy who decided to suffer in a way and for a reason that was in divine. You see, suffering, what if it's far greater than you ever imagined? What if your suffering was for a reason you'll never understand till glory? I've had suffering in my life that I don't know, and I'll ask God someday, and I bet you I'll be shocked. I wish I could preach to you why I suffer, but I don't know. But you see, we suffer in these ways, and that's why James says every gift, even the trial, is from God. Father, would you give us the strength to suffer well, knowing that, Jesus, you suffered more on a cross and in the Garden of Gethsemane than we'll ever suffer in our life. Physical suffering, spiritual, emotional, we don't even know. And there is suffering in this room. There's physical suffering, there's emotional suffering, all of the above. There's just, it's here. Would you, right now, in this moment, Spirit, would you change us in our seats to where we're different tonight because we know how to suffer, that we're going to suffer just like you've described. We're going to suffer well, knowing that his eyes, your eyes are always on us, knowing that's how we suffer and knowing why we suffer, that you're doing something greater than we could ever imagine. And it might just be that we have to wait to eternity to find it out, but we're going to trust you along the way. And I pray for folks in here that were just like me, and they just want the hope that's in others but have tried it or haven't or doubt it. Lord, that you are a God who knows right where they are too. And Lord, even though they might not know you yet, Lord, you have brought them here tonight for very reason, maybe is that. So God, I pray that you would make us a people that suffer well. And we'll ask it in Christ's name. Amen. All sufficient, shine.